The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Greetings from Minneapolis, everybody. It's Monday night, May 12th. I had to think about it for a second. May 12th, 2025. I'm Jim Peters, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. This is episode number 227, if you're keeping score at home. And we have a guest for you tonight. Robert K. Tanenbaum is joining us from his home in Southern California. He has a book coming out called That Day in Dallas. It's coming out on June 10th. He was the deputy chief counsel. And, I was just thinking about this. I'm just astonished at how the government can come up with these titles. He was the deputy chief counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 1970s, along with Richard Sprague, who was the chief counsel. And both those guys quit because they say they had irrefutable evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill John F. Kennedy, and the committee didn't want to hear it. So they both canned it. They can't, and so 50 years later, he's come out with a book. So we're really looking forward to talking to him. Now, we got a whole bunch of really cool guests coming up. Oh, by the way, I want to thank you folks. I took a week off, and that was supposed to be a vacation. It ended up being a trip for a funeral. My Uncle Donnie died, and many of you actually wrote in with sympathies. I really appreciate that. I do. Thank you very much. Because, other than the fact he was my sign-off, I really never talked to him about him until after he passed away. But anyway, yeah, so we went to a funeral this last weekend, and it was good as funerals go. It's like, you can't, it's not good, but as funerals go, it was what he wanted, and we were all happy about that. So anyway, I want to thank you folks for your well wishes. Really appreciate it. We got a whole bunch of really cool guests coming up on the show. Like my wife hates me saying, we got it going on. So tonight we have Robert Tanenbaum. Tomorrow, Dennis Neal. He has written a biography on the leadership genius of Elon Musk. He's coming on tomorrow. Tim Conaway, our old friend, the former executive editor of Hustler magazine, is on Wednesday. And Thursday, we have climatologist Matthew Willicke. And I'm not really great on the whole human-caused climate change thing, and apparently he isn't, but with reservations. My stance is based on all the science I've read, is that everyone agrees the world is warming up, but my stance is that humans are contributing only a minor factor to this. He's like it may be more than a minor factor, but it's not the major factor either. And I like this guy because I may disagree with him, but still, he's a straight shooter. That's why I have him on. Next Monday, Don Zorro, intelligent operative and lover of women, is joining us, our old friend. And Tuesday, AJ Rice, the conservative publicist and author. And AJ is, every single person you can name that's famous in the conservative sphere is a client of his. Every single one. You name a name, and he represents them. I just realized this afternoon, he is the rainmaker in conservative media. He is. He's coming on Tuesday. So we're looking forward to that. So we just got to get right into this here, right? ASAP. We're going to run a commercial now for Kong News. And when we come back, Robert Tanenbaum will be joining us. Stay tuned, please. Hi, all. I want to talk to you about Conk News. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but if you're a news junkie, you should try this out. Conk News is a news aggregator. Now, there are plenty of news aggregators on the web, but Conk News is different than all the rest, and here's how. Most other news aggregators will lump the top stories from each news source under that news source. The top 10 stories, like, for example, from Fox News, Breitbart, the New York Post, etc. What Conk News does is it sends its servers out onto the web to over 75 different news sources every 3 hours. And yes, this is an automated process, but in this case, that's actually a good thing. And collects the latest stories from said 75 sources and then lays them out on its own front page in the order they were posted, regardless of the source. So you see the latest stories at the top of the front page, regardless of where they're from. And this is all free to you. You don't need to log in. You don't need to subscribe, register, nothing. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to conk.com to check it out. That's conk.com, 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 Conk News. Joining us from his home in Southern California, Robert K. Tanenbaum. He's the author of the upcoming book, That Day in Dallas, and he was the deputy. Okay, Robert, I want to make sure I get this correct. You were the deputy chief counsel, right, of the House Select
Committee
on
investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy.
Yeah, I read your book over the weekend. It's pre-publication copy. It's absolutely fascinating. And normally, I have to tell you, I usually kind of skip over the bio parts at the beginning, but you sucked me in there about how you kind of set it up, about how you ended up with the ultimate conclusion to quit this whole enterprise. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. You went to Berkeley on a basketball scholarship, is that right?
Yeah, from Brooklyn, right.
And you, according to your book, you transferred a lot of the stuff you learned from basketball into your legal profession. Is that correct?
Yes, without question. Absolutely. I had some wonderful mentors, both in the legal aspect of it, in the DA's office in Manhattan, ultimately, where I spent 10 years in charge of the Homicide Bureau and in charge of the criminal courts. Criminal courts, by the way, you find interesting, I'm sure, is that we took in 250 new cases a day because we worked 24 around the clock.
That's nuts. 250 a day?
Exactly what it's like. The 150 in the what I call the day court. And that was from like 7 in the morning until 5 at night. And then we had the night court 7 days a week, which was from like 7 at night until we finished early in the morning. And that was another 100 cases. So it was 150 during the day and 100 at night. My main function, other than trying murder cases, of which I prosecuted more than anyone except for Richard Sprague. Sprague was a brilliant lawyer, an incredibly high integrity human being. I was blessed to have had him work with me. And he's the one who called me up to go to Washington in October of '76. He was just named chief counsel and in charge of the staff. And he asked me to go to Washington with him starting on January 1st. Of course, as you know, select committees have 2-year lives. And I did, and we went together. And the committee swore to us, because we were very adamant about this, that they not interfere politically with what we do in this committee investigation. Neither Sprague nor I had a brief about what was going on. If in fact we found Oswald from the evidence, from the immutable evidence, killed the president, and that's what we were going to say. And if the evidence was otherwise, we were going to tell the American public. Turned out the evidence was otherwise, but they then interfered 4 months later with our investigation. I'll get to that as we go forward here. But the bottom line to all of this is that for what it's worth, I just lost your picture. Does that matter now?
No, I can see you just fine.
Okay. I'm looking at a blank screen. That's all. I just wanted to make sure. I'm not sensitive about it, believe me.
I'm not that handsome, so you're not missing anything.
Anyway, what we determined at the end of all this was that the government knowingly contrived a predetermined conclusion through the pretense of an investigation. And that's both the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Here we go. And they disregarded, in so doing, all the convincing evidence to the contrary. They took this case, as the government has presented it, is rife with exculpatory evidence. And again, that's part of what I will demonstrate with respect to the lies the government, there were separate lies the government went out of its way for the last 62 years to tell the American public. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
All right, Robert, here's my real question. This is the big question I got from reading your book. All right, I understand everything you said, but that said, this commission, which is not the Warren Commission, and people get this confused, and I do want you to talk about the differences and what happened there in a second, but this commission did finally conclude that JFK was, quote unquote, probably killed as a result of a conspiracy. So
that came as a result of the House Select Committee. And it's a joke. It's another sad joke. Well, what did they mean when asked that the shot was fired from somewhere and the bullet is still flying around? They never said who shot it, who took that shot, where that person was, and who, if anyone, were they aiming at. That whole thing is a hoax.
So do you think it's just basically a cover-up to cover their ass? Is that what you're saying?
Well, again, a lot of the decent, God-fearing people who I have the utmost respect for, you included, is that the whole notion here of why has the CIA gone out of its way in order to lie about all this? And one of the reasons why we left was because Lou Stokes, who was our committee chairman, he was from Cleveland, he wouldn't give me the subpoenas about the CIA involvement in this case, and whether it was CIA or whether it was a rogue person. So as far as, all of that goes, the government has its reasons. And I hate to say this because I don't want to speculate. Everything I've done is immutable evidence, given the scientific audio, visual and acoustic upbuild from the date of assassination, which most people didn't have. I have it now. But what I'm trying to say here is that the whole notion of why our government, particularly the CIA, which has become our government, regrettably, and why do this? Why go through this exercise of deceit? And it is a serious exercise of deceit, unfortunately. The only argument I've ever seen out of the evidence, and this is, again, my opinion, this is what I avoid all the time, but it's an area that has given credibility, in my judgment, based upon all the evidence Sprague and I went through. And that was that as a result of the Bay of Pigs, in 1961, President Kennedy fired Allen Dulles as head of the CIA. Kennedy was absolutely in shock and disappointment. He felt he had been given up to the wrong elements about the Bay of Pigs investigation, because as you know, the Bay of Pigs investigation was supposed to be Cubans waiting for us on the shoreline to hug and kiss us and welcome us. It didn't work out that way, did it? So what happened was the CIA believed the following. We know they believe this. The question is to what extent. So I'll put this on the table for you. Of all the whys that are asked about this case, why they have lied consistently for 62 years, the notion is that as a result of the Bay of Pigs, JFK decided that Nixon had promised aerial bombing of Cuba as part of the investigation, as part of the exercise. When Kennedy realized what happened at the Bay of Pigs and fired Allen Dulles, he appointed John McCone. We'll get to him in a moment.
Yeah.
He was a very, very dedicated Kennedy lawyer person. And McCone in his own right became head of the CIA. And the bottom line to the whole story is that Kennedy was so stunned by the betrayal, he believed, of the whole situation at the Bay of Pigs. He told Bobby, then his brother, and then the
Attorney General.
He was the Attorney General, and he told Bobby, we're not done with this yet. And Bobby said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, Nixon in '59 went along with the program because they never consulted me in the campaign, and he was supposed to win. He was a sure winner, Nixon, as you recall, in '59 and 1960. So why get in touch with me?" And he said that Bobby said, "Well, what do you mean it's not over?" He said, "Because I said Nixon agreed to have bombing to protect the people on the island. And Kennedy got him in a room. And this comes from a very, very high-end source. Kennedy got him in a room alone. And he said to him, under no circumstances are you going to bomb Cuba. And Kennedy looked at him. He said, our government agreed. He said, if you dare do that, you will be no different from the Japanese Imperial Army that bombed Pearl Harbor. And I am telling you, under no circumstances are you going to destroy your life because Richard Nixon made a mistake. Kennedy was stunned. He stared at his brother, hugged him, and thanked him. To this day, as you know, I'm sure, the elements that survived the Bay of Pigs curses out the existence of President Kennedy because he did not bomb as was promised by Nixon.
Well,
so here's the story. I'm getting to the climax here. I do this all the time with my kids and my wife. And here's the answer to it. Kennedy decided the only person he could trust through all this was his brother, Bobby, the Attorney General. And he told Bobby that what we're going to do is end every executive intelligence agency, rather every executive agency has an intelligence wing. And he said, we're going to do away with it. He said, and Bobby said, you mean the CIA? I said, that's exactly what I mean. And you're going to be in charge of all executive intelligence. You're going to be Article 2, Mr. Intelligence. And we'll start from there. We're never going to go through this again, this deceit and these lies, and for reasons that have no good cause. That is the only explanation. There could be others. I'm not saying this is from immutable evidence. I'm saying it's very darn close to it. But if people ask me, and they do all the time, particularly good people like you and others who have legitimate questions to ask about all this, based upon my experience, which is somewhat unique in the whole story here, because of the access I had, particularly with the Zapruder film, every frame is a piece of evidence for us. So that is a segue in, if you will, to what we were up against and what we're up against with respect to dealing with Sprague and I dealing with the council committee that promised us they would not engage in politics. And it took them, and that is, as I said, whatever the facts were, we were going to tell the American public. It took them 4 months before we realized they completely lied, every single one of them. And that was because they wouldn't. It turned out that I went to get subpoenas regarding whether or not, and I heard from my sources told me these documents existed, that the CIA talked about whether or not was doing an inquiry, whether the CIA was doing the inquiry as alleged to determine whether or not the CIA in its entirety and officialdom was responsible and participated in the assassination, or was it a rogue CIA? And there were plenty of rogue CIA guys who were involved at the time. Many of whom, at least one of whom I know you know about.
Yeah.
But the point is that that's what happened in the case. And from there, we can move into the evidence. If you want to find out the truth about a case, you go to the scene. And what's amazing about the crime scene is that most people are mistaken about how they're important witnesses. Like if I'm a witness, hypothetically, Joe Smith's a hypothetical witness, and he says to you, he said, with all due respect, I can identify, or I can't. Let's take either one you want. But they believe that the only essence of their existence that is valuable is if they can see the shooter in a homicide case and then say, I can make it a positive identification, have a lineup. It's okay, I can handle it. If they don't believe they can do that, and they didn't believe they can do it in this case, and they didn't do it in this case, then they don't believe how important they are. But here's how important, as an example, they are in the fact-finding that Sprague and I went through, because Dick Sprague, as I said to you, he's the only person who ever tried more cases as a prosecutor. He pressed on more than I, and that's saying a heck of a lot. For 10 years, you do the math on this. For 10 years, I worked in the DA's office of the office of legendary DA Frank Hogan. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I was in charge ultimately of the criminal courts, as I said, in the Homicide Bureau. And I have prosecuted more cases to verdict. These are trials to verdict, not trials. You get a juror comes in and then the defendant says, oh, gee whiz, I now changed my mind. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about trying these cases to verdict. And as I told you before a couple of times already, I'm very sensitive to this. I don't want anyone to determine that I did all this by myself. That's not the case. Sprague was fantastic throughout. Brilliant, honest. You don't get him any better. When we came after this investigation, we worked together and we had a very, very wonderful friendship, professional friendship for 46 years. So I know a little bit about the man, and I was very pleased beyond recognition, I should say, that
Robert,
this is the person I worked with. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have to ask you about this, though. Frank Hogan, the guy you worked under in the Manhattan DA's office, and I did not just know this from what you said in your book, had a reputation of only trying cases where you actually had basically immutable evidence. And you're saying even under those standards, you did 250 a day, huh? I find this incredible. It's not as
I will say, I'm glad you asked that, because he has never wavered. He never wavered. That is, Hogan never wavered in doing that which was the right thing. And there's a book, Echoes of My Soul, which my bureau chief asked me to write in 2010, believe it or not. And I had been out of the office in the late 70s. And he wanted me to do the book about Echoes of My Soul, it's called. And it's a book about a brutal, dull murder where two girls were absolutely destroyed in their third-floor apartment in a hot 1963 summer night. And they had the window open to the third-floor area that led to the kitchen. The killer came in through the serviceway, raped and murdered them, and then fled. And the DA's office charged George Whitmore, who was a 19-year-old black kid who wouldn't step on an ant, literally, with the murders. And then it turned out that my bureau chief discovered that he was the wrong guy. Well, if the media ever got any case right, it was this case. Who can be safe in their apartment if in the fashionable Upper East Side, doorman, all the accoutrements of support and security, if they're not safe, well, who the heck is in New York? And that was a legitimate question to be asked. So Hogan brought his staff up and he had Mel Glass explain to them why the evidence was wrong, totally wrong. And it was because the homicide detectives in Brooklyn fed information to the Whitmore person, and he then shot it back to them. And he kept saying, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. You'll go home, George, when you tell us the truth. The old line, when you lead someone down into the valley of death. And he said, you know, what else? What else? Okay, so they said the murder weapon you used, it was on the kitchen table, wasn't that? This is just one example. And he said, oh, okay, yeah, I got the murder weapon from the table. Is that right? They said, yes, very good. There was no kitchen table. Then he had a picture of a young woman, a blonde, and the detectives never bothered in Brooklyn to see who the girl was. And they assumed it was Janice Wiley. And they said, this is Janice Wiley, the girl you killed. Oh, yes, the girl I killed, Janice Wiley. Never saw her in his life. When Mel Glass in the DA's office in Manhattan got a hold of this case, they went to the father, Max Wiley. You can imagine how his state of mind was, knowing his daughter was brutally murdered. This horror, this nightmare that we pray doesn't happen to anyone. And Mel in going through this thing, and the homicide detectives in Brooklyn, if you can imagine this, never showed the photo to a family member. And when Mel got the case, and then you go through all the evidence again now, because everything's questionable. It turned out that Janice Wiley's father was shown the photo. He wasn't asked, for example, is this your daughter? That's not what you do in this stuff. Or do you see the defendant in the lineup? You don't say that. Do you recognize the person in this photograph? And he said, no. Then Mel said, is this your daughter? He said, no, of course not. You imagine trying this case with those two examples I gave you. There are more. Where one, you're telling the murderer allegedly is saying that he got the murder weapon from the kitchen table, and there's no kitchen table. And then he had a photograph of the deceased, which he found in a garbage dump in New Jersey, where he came from. That's where he was visiting his aunt in Brooklyn when this whole thing happened. And so here you have the ultimate example of how leading questions, thank God, that that the Brooklyn detectives didn't know all the facts, and they made them up as they thought they flowed. And that's how Whitmore gave it back to him. And that's why Whitmore was dismissed. Hogan, here's the example of what you gave me. Hogan called up his senior bureau staff. Hogan was DA since 1942 until 1974. He was always supported by the Democrat, liberal, conservative wing of each party. And of the party, he was endorsed by 4 separate parties. And the Independent Party, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, the Liberal Party, all in New York. And he called up his senior staff. And there was a good number of people in that office, because Mel Glass told me this. He was there. And there was, at least 20 people were there who had been there a long time. And Hogan said, Mel, I want Mel to tell you exactly what he told me and about the lack of evidence we had in this case. And my name is on that indictment. I'm the DA of New York County. Mm-hmm. And I'm not blaming this on anyone. This isn't the Brooklyn case or anything else like that, notwithstanding those issues. And he said, what do you think I should do here? And each of these experienced people said, you take the plea. Whitmore was willing to plead guilty. You take the plea, because if you don't take the plea, the public will know we indicted the wrong guy in this case. And that's not going to inure to your benefit. We take the plea, we wash our hands of the case. The Brooklyn DA's office has 2 murder cases against him. Let them try him. And Hogan stood up from his desk and he said, you mean to tell me that I should take a guilty plea from a person we know who is innocent? Every one of them said yes, because if you do it, it'll ruin your reputation. And the defense bar knows that there was a major Q&A he gave. I mean, Whitmore gave a 62-page Q&A, all fed back to the Brooklyn detectives and taken down by Steno. And Hogan said, you're telling me that if I don't take this plea, it's going to hurt my career. Is that what you're saying to me? They said, absolutely correct. And we won't be able to use confessions, because everybody will know in the defense world that he had a confession, and we still didn't go forward with the case against Whitmore. And then he just jammed his fist on the desk and he said, I want to know one thing. When did we become so corrupt? They all stood there in silence. Mel said, I want to see basically letters of resignation from everybody. I'll decide what to do. Mel, go downstairs and do justice. Mel went downstairs and dismissed the case against Whitmore. Now, and by the way, what's ironic about this? Maybe not ironic, but in respect to the questions you're asking, Hogan's reputation as a result of what he did soared.
Yeah.
He was already a legend.
Right.
Before I got there in '68 out of law school right away. And I could tell you, there was never an issue about his integrity. And I think this is the finest example. I urge the viewers here. I know I'm supposed to talk about hell when I'm supposed to talk about to you.
Fun.
Yeah, that night, that day in Dallas, I'm supposed to talk about. I love that book. That book is my best book ever, believe me. And it has a lot to do. And I applaud you for reminding me of all the time I spent doing the preamble portion, which has to do with my value system and how I obtained my value system. And I just gave you one of the greatest examples you can possibly have. You start thinking more about yourself and keeping your job and power, then you have no business being in our government. That's what I'm coming from on this thing.
This whole show revolves around that, Robert, because I'm kind of naive and I keep wondering how come politicians can't do the right thing, especially because in your case and in Hogan's case, you guys had permanent jobs. This was your job to do this. Elected officials in the United States are basically supposed to be temporary, and they still can't give it up. I mean, I'm constantly asking people on this show, how come people just can't do the right thing? I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know what the difference is between you and the vast sea of politicians and lawyers out there who don't do what you and Hogan and Sprague did. I don't understand.
Well, I appreciate what you're suggesting here, believe me, but there are other people out there.
And I'm not trying to sugarcoat you either. This is an actual question.
No, I'm with you. I believe me, and I'm not trying to sneak out and be the good guy here. I'm not a good guy. You know what I'm telling you? I'm just a guy from Brooklyn who lived with people who did the right thing. And it started with my parents. My mother was a school teacher. My father was in business and so on, and my older brother. I mention all this anecdotal detail. Some things that I've never told anyone are in that anecdotal detail about the formation of my value system. And working for Hogan was the ultimate, because there was never an issue that I came across with him, and we became very close, as you know from reading the book. Very, very close. He like adopted me as his son, and I was forever enriched. So I applaud you for saying what you said about the initial portion of the book. You know, it's almost like that great movie we saw. I'm sure you saw it as well, with Dakota Fanning and the firing man. What is the title?
Man on Fire.
Man on Fire with Washington, with Denzel Washington.
You know,
If in that movie, I urge you to see it. I urge you people to get Echoes of My Soul, my book on this thing that we just talked about. But in that movie, like my book, it's interesting. Denzel Washington goes through this transformation from being a hitman for the CIA, and he asks a very dear friend of his who's in the movie with him, will God ever forgive us for what we did? And then this fellow, the friend of his, gets him a job watching trying to avoid kidnapping in Mexico City of Dakota Fanning. And she must have lived another life, because there's no child who could have acted the way she did in this film. I urge you to see it. And the reason I mention this is that if you don't accept the relationship, which ultimately becomes a very friendly, guarded relationship that Denzel Washington has with Dakota Fanning, and he rejects that relationship up front, he reminding her he's just there to make sure she's not kidnapped. Well, guess what? They become very close friends, and she gets kidnapped, and he thinks she's murdered. And then he goes after the killers. But if you don't buy into the initial relationship that they had together, this friendship, this protection, then you shouldn't go further with the movie and waste your time. I urge you to see it, because it was brilliantly done. And at the same time, it's exactly what I try to do with That Day in Dallas in the beginning of the book. It's not two separate books or anything like that.
No, it isn't. No.
It's very important for me and the reader to know who I am, where I'm coming from. And if they have any question about any of that, they feel otherwise, I say throw the book away. Don't waste your time, because it's a very important aspect of the book and of my life. This book was the best thing I've ever done, and it took me the most time. And there are factors involved that are easily explainable as to why it took so much time. And it had to do with sicknesses and cancer and so many different things, tumors, number 4s, and on and on and on. And, like everybody else, I had my own kinds of source. So that's the bottom line in the story.
Robert, I want to go back. You were talking about the crime scene, and let's go there, because you were also talking about the fact about, what is and isn't evidence. And I am not a lawyer by any means, but I read a little bit. I know a little bit about stuff. And it's worth pointing out here too, that you apparently have never lost a felony case, right? Not even when you outside of the DA's office, you haven't, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Right. So that's a pretty damn incredible track record, especially considering the number of cases you were in.
I just outworked everybody, and I had some great detectives, believe me. That's what it came down to. Preparation.
Right. So actually, on the idea of great detectives, so at the crime scene, you were talking about witnesses, and this is kind of my problem with a lot of conjecture per se, is that you're a criminal prosecutor, but if in the civil case realm, there's the preponderance of evidence. In other words, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. You need a preponderance of evidence. And you were talking about all these witnesses, and I don't see how people can blow this off after you got 40 or 50 or 60 people saying more or less the same thing. At some point, you got to think, well, not everybody's crazy. That's the part I don't understand. I'm gonna talk here for a second. I'm gonna give you. I've been studying this assassination the Dealey Plaza thing for 30 years. This is what I've come up with. Now, I call myself a meta researcher. I don't actually do any research. I read other people's research. I pretty much buy, you know what James Files is? Is that familiar to you? He worked for the Chicago mob. He was a hitman for the Chicago mob. He's in his 80s now. He says he was on the grassy knoll and shot and killed John F. Kennedy. A lot of people said it was Lucien Sardy, a French hitman, but he was in prison at that time, so it wasn't him at all. So at any rate, what I understand, this is the way I look at this, and this is basically, you and I end up with the same story. There were 3 or 4 gunmen that were triangulated around the plaza. One was in the Tal Tex building. Files says that was Chuck Nicoletti, his boss in Chicago. Nicoletti was on the grassy knoll, and somebody who Files says he actually doesn't know who it was in the Texas School Book Depository. It may or may not have been Oswald. He doesn't even know. But the point is, everyone says the shot came from the grassy knoll. How many people? I mean, you've said this in the book. When the shots rang out, everybody ran there. I understand, especially I'm a musician. It's like an acoustic box. I understand. I've been to Dealey Plaza too. I understand that. But still, that many people can't be that confused. And so my point, what I'm trying to get to here is how much evidence, circumstantial evidence, witness testimony do you need before you start to buy something? You're looking at, you as a prosecutor look at as you're looking for like absolute truth. And I have to admit, I'm starting to, right now we're at the age where you can fake pretty much any photograph convincingly. It's easy. 14-year-old kids can do it in their mom's basement, you know? And considering that, at some point you have to get back to the witness testimony, you know?
Well, here's the answer. Well, it's a great question, because in fact there are to one of the major areas of this case, there are like between 30, 40, 50, 60, you name it, individuals who saw the fact that the fourth shot, which I'll get to in a second, at Dealey Plaza blew Kennedy's head off. It blew the back of his head off. And yet the CIA ignored that for 62 years. Why? Because the CIA has had cause, based upon the evidence, to lie. They don't want to have a situation where they are involved in doing what allegedly they have done here, which is outrageous in the extreme. So what we're talking about here is that the witnesses at the scene, I'll give you the example so it's very clear for you and everyone else, that there were the witnesses said at the crime scene, and again, Sprague and I handled this like it was any other murder case. I mean, there's nothing magical that we did. That there were 2 flurries of shots. The first flurry, the witnesses said, had 2 or 3 shots, and it hit Kennedy in the back in a downward track, and it hit Connolly in the back. Then there was a pause after those first shots, which they said were 2 or 3. It turns out, because of all the science we have and the counting of friends, it was 3 shots. And it only took 2.6 seconds. They were right on both counts, basically. And then there was a pause after the first flurry. That turned out to be 4.8 seconds. They didn't know the numbers here, but they're right on with respect to what they told the law enforcement the first hour of the assassination. And then the kicker to the case is, one of the major aspects of this case in evidentiary persuasion is the following. And that is that Zapruder frame 313. That was the 4th shot, causing a boom blast. And you'll know when the boom blast, what occurred. The people, Holland et al., who were working for him, were on the bridge, the train bridge. And they looked immediately to their left. They heard the blast. They saw the smoke coming up from the high-powered rifle shot. And then Bobby Sargis, who was the motorcycle detective in the motorcade, got splattered with blood, bone, and brain from Kennedy's head. He was riding by Jackie Kennedy's side, Hargis. He dropped his motorcycle and took off for the stockade fence area where the shot originated. And you know where it originated because Zapruder is to his right, looking down at the stockade fence, and which is in the front of the limo with the president, and it was to the right of the Knoll Hill area. So the limo had not yet passed that area, and that's why the shot came from the front. It wasn't the front like he was standing in front of the car. It was from the side, and it hit him above the right ear.
It was the front right, basically, right?
Yes, and that's the temple area above the right ear. And here's the king. Here's this thing. I'm going to repeat this. That Kennedy's head, when he was hit with the fourth shot, his head, you know this better than anyone, violently snapped back and slumped him dead, resting in Mrs. Kennedy's shoulder. He was also bodily depressed, and he was immobile. Now, why do I say that's so important? Because the government's case is 3 shots from the rear, hit Kennedy on the back, and you can argue whether or not they meant to say 2 shots in the head, blah, blah, blah. But here's the kicker. There is no way on planet Earth that we would have an invalid science be offered by the government as the truth of what happened. And here it is. Kennedy's head snapped violently to the back, but he was shot in the back. He was shot in the back of the head. So, people with a brain in their head said, hey, this can't be. So what the government then said, oh, wait a minute. We'll gelatinize 10 skulls, replicas of what we believe to be the human skull. And we'll do the same distance and height from the depository to 6th floor so-called window and sniper's nest window. And they, with high-powered rifles, same sort of thing, they fired into these skeletons. They hit the back of the skeleton's head. And what direction do you think the skeleton's head moved?
From the back forward.
Exactly. Thank you very much. You can go home for lunch now. It's okay. And this isn't the brain science, but what did the government say? The government, to compound this, said, look, we have scientific evidence of the following. No one could violate what we're about to say. If you violate what we're saying on the science, then you're one of these people who believes that the earth is flat. Ha, ha, ha. This is what they were talking about. Neutron activation analysis. Neutron activation analysis, N as in Nancy, AA, was the science that the government said proved that there are only 2 real bullets in this case. One was the 2 large fragments that were found in the limo. They said that they came from the same bullet. That was a fragment to a fragment. And they said that the fragments taken from Connolly's wrist matched Commission Exhibit 399, the so-called magic bullet, the pristine bullet. Well, you know what happened here? This is fascinating to me, how issues that are public interest and people otherwise would not get involved except they know things. And here's what they know. Meteorological PhDs from around the country got together and offered critiques about how NAA is totally scientifically invalid. No one from the government bothered to speak to the PhDs. After all, everybody in the government knows what's going on, don't they? They'll tell you anything you want to know. So the FBI now was under attack in the media because they were sending agents out to testify in criminal cases under oath that these fragments in the front came from the same bullet, and that Connolly's fragment in his wrist, his axial nerve in his wrist was shattered. The tendon in his right hand was shattered between the thumb and the index finger. And he had that Stetson hat on, you might recall. He didn't have it on, he had it in his hand.
Yeah.
It was upside down, so he would do is flip it over. He then finally, when he got hit with these fragments, he drops that hat. And I'll get to that as well. Now, the 10 experts that the government wanted were offered and accepted by the meteorological experts. And 10 of them came forward and examined the case from Alpha to Omega. And they all came out and said NAA is not to be used. It's invalid. To which the FBI did the following. It thanked them for their opinion, and it shut down the one lab we had in this country that examined NAA materials, and they shut down the lab on September 1st, 05. And they demanded that FBI agents are now forbidden to ever mention NAA again, other than to say it's an invalid science. Didn't stop the CIA from using all this.
Right.
This is an example of some of the major lies that occurred. Now, also involved in this situation was, and by the way, I gave the JFK Records Act of 1992 and the Assassination Record Review Board of 93, I gave testimony to. I was asked to by the person who was in charge of the organization. Seemed to be a very decent, honest guy. And they asked me about, should we give over the documents? I said, give over everything. This is not your material. These are the people's material. Unfortunately, President Trump had, this makes him human, I guess. He said in his first term he was going to hand over all the documents. And when he didn't, he was asked, how come, Mr. President, you didn't turn them over? He said, well, if you saw what I saw in some of these documents, you wouldn't have turned it over either. Those documents that he is referring to, and I don't question that this is how he saw what was going on. But I would have told him the very reason you're giving for not turning it over is why you should give it over.
Yeah.
The American public can handle the truth, believe it or not. And that's what makes us a great country.
Robert, but here's my question to you, and I know you don't like to speculate, but I got a whole show here based on speculation, and you are the best person to speculate on this. If Trump told the truth that, like you said, that if you saw what I saw, you wouldn't turn them over, what did he see?
I wish I knew the answer to that.
Oh, okay.
It could have been so many different things about other people's involvement in this thing.
Yeah.
I'm a Trump supporter. I make no bones about this.
I am too.
I'm expelled from cocktail parties here and so on, but it's worthy of that to be, to make sure that we have someone who saved our country on November 5th. So it's so varied that if we sat down together, what would be the worst thing you can possibly see? The worst thing I could possibly see, coming right out of this, and had a lot of time to think about it, obviously, was that maybe there were other people who were similarly indictable and weren't. But again, that's sheer speculation. When I tried these cases, you hit it on the head. Immutable evidence as corroborated by scientific, audio, visual, and acoustics. I've used that constantly in my cases, as did Sprague. And we were fortunate. We were fortunate because of all the areas where we tried cases. In Manhattan is not a very kosher place to wind up trying all these cases. You got jurors who believe tens of thousands of things as far as gossip goes, but I was able to hold them to the evidence and the facts. And thank God it worked out that way for justice.
But you've said, of course, in your book, the whole book is based on the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald did not shoot JFK. But do you think he was involved, or was he one of the shooters? Because, for example, going back to the thing about James Files, James says, yeah, we had somebody in the window, but I don't know who it was. And Files says that he knew that Lee Harvey Oswald was tangentially involved. And you said this in your book just in passing, and this is really important because people don't realize this, that it has since been verified that Oswald was an asset of both the CIA and the FBI. That's been verified now.
Since 1957. Since 1957 at Sugi Air Force Base, he was involved in monitoring the U-2 flights, one of which was shot down, and Gary Powers was the captain and the pilot of that plane. So right. He has been in the CIA. He has been a member of the CIA and the FBI for all of these years. And good point, because the people, as I mentioned, in the John McCone case, where McCone became the CIA director after Allen Dulles was fired in '61 as a result of the Bay of Pigs, they were mortified that various leaks were occurring from their agencies. And one of the agencies was the James Rowley Secret Service Agency. And so they didn't want the American public to know that, in fact, Oswald, and this could have been what Trump was worried about, that Oswald had been working as a special agent for both the CIA and the FBI. That could have been it. I don't know, though. I'm not saying it's it. But I am saying this to you. One of the pieces of evidence that we received, I was able to get, which has been verified. The government says it's a phony evidence thing. It's amazing how glib they are, and they manufacture these lies up. But McCone wrote a document in answer to James Rowley, head of the Secret Service. And McCone's dated his at March 3rd, 64. And he said that he too was worried. Rowley wanted to know from McCone what his considerations were and concerns and what he did to protect the fact that Oswald was not a member of the CIA. I'm sorry, that Oswald was not a member of the CIA. And so he wrote down in this 2-page letter that the leaks and LHO, Lee Harvey Oswald, as used in the context of all this, his training and suspect activity. I'm concerned about it because if this information in any way were disclosed to the wrong persons, you have an idea who they were, it would lead the media to erroneously claim that the CIA and others perhaps were directly involved in the Dallas action. Now, that's how they refer to the assassination. They refer to it as the Dallas action, the so-called in-crowd. And while the persons involved, and again, he's saying in substance, and I'm adding to this, but while the persons involved, he wrote, were in the employ of this agency, meaning they had worked for the CIA. I read this like 10 times when I got my hands on it.
Right.
And while the persons involved were in the employ of this agency as well as the FBI, it is impossible to maintain full 24-hour-a-day responsibility over our operatives. Now, that comes from the head of the CIA in March of 64, March 3rd to be exact. And if we go right back to Dealey Plaza, we know that when you shoot someone from in the back of the head, as the 3 shooters they claimed took their shots, they claimed they came from the open window in the 6th floor of the book depository, and that's a sniper's nest, as they alleged it to be. But there was a 5th shot, and the 5th shot hit the president in the cowlick area above the top of his head.
Yeah.
At that point, he was dead, and his head went forward because that shot did come from the back. And it happened 0.7 of a second after the 4th shot. 0.7 of a second after the 4th shot. That would put us at frame 328. 313 frame is the shot to the head. The 4th shot blew his back of his head off. Clint Hill, who just passed away, the Secret Service agent, wrote a book about when he ran up and saw into the car area. He looked down at the president and he had no interior of the head. The cerebellum was hanging out. So the argument for the CIA about this nonsense about when you shoot somebody from the back, that their head is going to go backwards is so utter nonsense because the film changed everything for us. If we didn't have the film in all these frames, where would we be? Where would we be? So the 4 things that these fragmentations did, which was very important to understand in this case, it was Kennedy's head moved forward even though he was dead. It enlarged the wound. After the 4th shot. You can see that actually, the 18.3 frames per second process, you can see that there's a hangover onto the right ear of the 5th shot. And then there was interior damage to the limo windshield that caused the flare ultimately at 328, frame 328. And then Connolly, as I mentioned before, had his wrist shattered. So they then came into a problem, which I must mention to you. This is another problem you don't even know can happen because when you lie, there are so many different variables. When you tell the truth, you can tell it many different ways. You lie, you better stick to the same story, brother, because you're going to be in big trouble, and here's big trouble. In December of 63, Secret Service and FBI found that Connolly and Kennedy were struck by 2 separate bullets. 2 separate bullets. And both were shot in 1.9 seconds of each other, okay? Both were shot within 1.9 seconds of each other. But you know, from your expertise, that the manual bolt action necessary to fire separate successive shots from the alleged murder weapon, the Malico rifle, takes 2.3 seconds. There you go.
Right.
It takes 2.3 seconds, and they were hit within 1.9 seconds. You just lost your murder weapon if you're a liar.
Yeah, or you have two people. Right. You just proved that more
standing next to each other. Yeah, exactly. Which no one has ever alleged, by the way.
Yeah.
Now there is so what happened after that? The CIA ordered, I want you to know, Arlen Specter, who ultimately became DA of Philadelphia and Senator Specter from Pennsylvania, to come up with a single bullet theory. Of all the things I said, you got to really sit down for this one.
Oh, hold it. Before you get started, when you're talking about like leaps of logic or conjecture, this is one of the easiest ones to make. This theory is so full of crap, it's unbelievable. And it always has been. It has been since the day they proposed it. Anybody who buys this is nuts. But anyway, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. And so what I fear is that grown people with some intellectual background, were spewing it out.
Well,
and
Robert,
guess what they were spewing out?
I want your reaction to this. The problem, if you want to call it the problem, is that there's a certain percentage of the public that will buy anything anybody in authority tells them. So if the FBI comes and says, oh, this one bullet did all this stuff, they say, well, okay, that's unusual, but okay. Well, it's not unusual. It's almost impossible. I mean, it's like you can't even on some strange planet where math doesn't exist, this could happen, but this didn't happen. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's like the chance. What I think, did you say in your book that the chances of this working are like 100 trillion to 1? Yeah, no shit.
Well, I should ask Elon Musk whether in Mars this could happen. That's what
exactly. It's bullshit.
Anyway, here is the theory at large. The theory is based upon the fact that there were the shots fired in the depository area, and that Kennedy and Connolly had downward tracks. What does that mean to the lay public? It means that we know from the autopsy that between 5 and 6 inches below the neckline, keep in mind this bullet, according to the theory, had to come out his throat. Yeah. But 5 or 6 inches puts him right above in the shoulder area, aligned with that area way below. So how does this bullet get out the throat? And here it is. Somewhere along the line, they argued, these advocates, that the bullet that was on this downward track in Kennedy actually moved vertically upward 11 degrees. Just think of what I just said.
Yeah.
In the abdomen area, they were claiming that if the bullet were down there on this downward track, it came up. And it went out his throat, JFK's throat. And then it fractured, and then it struck Connolly in his rib. And Connolly then was struck, as I mentioned before, in the axial nerve of his right wrist, and severed the tendon in his right hand from thumb area to index finger. Now, let's compare that with the following piece of evidence I want to mention to you. So I hope everybody gets what I just said, because it's so outrageous for anybody to advocate this. When's the last time a downward track bullet actually stopped and came up vertically?
Yeah, really.
Jesus Christ. Okay, so now here's the story. There is what in this case is called minute metallic fragments. And those minute metallic fragments can be seen. And I urge you and your audience to get a hold of the 3 skull x-ray shots of JFK's head. What happened here is, to help establish what the importance of this evidence is, minute metallic fragments, is that JFK's head at the right side and angling from high in the right temple area, and it came through the rear region. Scientists had drawn a rectangular 1 inch separating, a narrow rectangular area above the right ear And the reason for this is, if I were shot now in the back of my head as I'm sitting here with you, there would be no minute metallic fragments in the front of my head. So what does this tell us, these minute metallic fragments? Never asked by anybody on the House Select Committee after Sprague and I left, which was in 4 months. We left in March of 77. And what it tells us is the direction of the wound, because if I'm hit here in my right side of my head, and we had x-rays of it, you would see the minute metallic fragments being created. But here's the other kicker here, talking about how we know things that we wouldn't know otherwise, other than honest investigation. So it tells us what the direction of the wound is, but also the point of entry. And that's what's important here, because the government has always ignored that since all the shots were from the rear, how could it be that Kennedy's head snapped backward? That's the bottom line.
Robert, have you ever seen, there's a digitally cleaned up version of the Zapruder film. Have you ever seen it?
I've seen it. I turn it off because when I see it, not that this has anything to do with what you're referring to. Some of it's fine and dandy, but I have limited myself throughout not watching any of this stuff because it's too frustrating for me. People come up with answers to stuff. They don't know what the hell they're talking about half the time. But there are good people involved in this, and I don't want to lump everybody together.
Yeah, right.
So I just, I'll go back to watching cartoons for a while. I'm all right with that. Trust me.
Well, the reason I brought this up is because in the digitally cleaned up version, where of course they put it at 30 frames a second, actually I think it was 60 frames a second, and they took out the camera jitter and all that sort of stuff. In that version, it's plainly obvious she's getting shot from the front. Yeah, I don't think it's that obvious on the actual raw film, but it's plainly obvious in the digitally cleaned up version. I mean, it's not. And then and I can't remember the name of the woman. She was a forensic officer for the Dallas Police Department for 25 years. She said she poured over the evidence, and she said she was absolutely 100% certain he was shot from the front. That's what she said. Here's a woman who had
right. I don't want people to think when we say he was shot from the front that they're standing right there on Elm Street. That's not what happened. We have to understand. No. You understand it, of course, but it came from the right's front side. The limo hadn't passed that area yet, and that's why the bullet hits him here. My hand is over my temple area above the right ear and blew out the back of his head.
Right, but it was not from the back. That's the real point. Exactly. And the reason, if you want to look into this in the future, the reason I buy James Files' testimony is because he said a bunch of stuff that was formerly, that has since been corroborated by hard evidence. Like one is, he said he used a Remington Fireball rifle is what he said he used for this job. And he said that his boss in the Deltex building, Chuck Nicoletti, he was told, do not shoot unless it's obvious he's not dead yet. And it was, so he shot one shot, he said, but he said that his boss, Nicoletti, shot from the back at virtually the exact same time. In other words, they had bullets. He said it was like 1,000th of a second apart from each other. And that completely corroborates with your thing about the fact that there was a shot that hit the top of Kennedy's head. That's the other. There's all sorts of things like this that he has said that has since been proven true that weren't known at the time. And that's the reason I buy his testimony.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting in support of this. I'm glad you mentioned this. No one mentions what I'm about to tell you, and it's in support of what you're talking about. Dr. Robert Shaw was the thoracic surgeon who handled Connolly. He had two doctors. The other one was the other doctor handled the fragmentation of the issue. And when the doctor, as you know from your experience, particularly medical examiners, they'll hold up their microphone and they will dictate into it, and then it'll be taken down stenographically. And the reason for that is if something happened to the doctor, you want to have continuity of what the findings were.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, unwittingly, this is a totally unwittingly piece of evidence. Dr. Shaw said, shot entering Kennedy's body at a 27-degree declination. From the top of the county records building to the point of impact of JFK, it's 27 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
The county records building, which filings I think mentioned, and he's right, in my opinion, was that there was an open area, completely open, looking down the westward on Elm Street. There was no angle shot. It was from that rooftop. It's as if I'm looking right at you right now.
Right.
And both of them unwillingly talk about 27 degrees.
Yeah.
And that to me is what I call the beauty of doing an honest investigation. And how do we justify this? And you just mentioned one of the reasons, because
I tell you what, let's point out to the viewers, if you're standing on the spot where Kennedy got shot, and you're looking back toward the end of Lee Plaza, you have the Texas Book Depository on your left, the Daltex building right center, and the county records building slightly off to the right, if you're looking backwards. So, and you're right, from the records building, it's an absolute clear shot. There's no trees, nothing, so
I don't believe in coincidences is the bottom line. Everybody
I know. I don't either. That's the reason.
That's why I'm telling you this, because it's hard for me to just sit down and cover every one of the issues and so on and so on. But to me, that has always been a fascinating occurrence that nobody has ever talked about, the 27-degree declination.
Yeah. I have so many damn questions here. We're already gone over an hour. Do you have a few more minutes?
I'll give you 2 more minutes, kiddo, any day of the week.
Okay, let's get back to the people in Dealey Plaza. A guy named Arnold Rowland said he saw 2 people in the window at the Texas Book Depository with the rifles, and he assumed they were Secret Service agents. So I'm going to get back to what I asked you before. Do you think Oswald was involved in any way whatsoever? Like, he worked in the building, that was known. It's very famous. He was found in the second floor break room 60 seconds after the shooting by both his manager and a policeman.
Because there's what we call exculpatory evidence in the law, which is very important. It slows down crazy prosecutors, and to have exculpatory evidence, that which exists in this case is legendary. If someone wants to make a case against Oswald, just what you're talking about right now, the facts of Oswald, people saw people with rifles. Well, who were they? And what, if anything, did that have to do with Oswald? So I can tell you the following. What I tried to do in the book was avoid the debates about Tippit and Oswald were at the Carousel Club 2 or 3 nights before, having dinner there with Ruby and the whole thing. I wanted to avoid getting involved in did he shoot or did he not shoot and so on, because there's ample evidence on the exculpatory evidence side that gives you nighttime nightmares if you're trying this case and you have all this exculpatory evidence. How are you going to explain this stuff away? And by the way, you better give it over. This isn't like maybe it's not.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. And that's, prosecutors, in fact, there should be very high standards for prosecutors not giving over exculpatory evidence during a trial. It should not come up on appeal. That should not happen. So it's just, thank you for giving me the opportunity to expound on something that I care a great deal about. I always ask the kids when they ask me, when I sit down and go over the case, I said, of course. And I always ask them, I said, well, tell me now about the exculpatory evidence in the case. Dead silence. I said, oh, brother, take your time. You want to get along with me and get along with your conscience, you better know what the heck you're talking about.
Your point is well taken. There is, even though we know Oswald was in the building, there's absolutely no evidence to indicate he was actually in the window shooting. None.
But in addition to which, allegedly, on exculpatory evidence, there were 2 women, one of whom he shared a coke with. They heard shots. And
right.
Imagine you're trying this case and some woman, is she part of the conspiracy here? All of a sudden, she heard shots with Oswald sitting around there, and they went out and they saw what was going on. Come on. That's what the other side of this coin is. You must examine what the exculpatory evidence is in the case, assuming it was Oswald kind of situation, so we can have an intelligent conversation about it, not that no routine stuff. But Sprague and I went over every one of these issues. We went over, for example, organized crime. The fellow who took over for Sprague and me, He had never really, to my knowledge, ever. He's a professor. God bless the professors. And he never dealt with the case. He never tried a murder case. He never investigated a case, to my knowledge. This is a hell of a case to break your teeth in, I'll tell you that.
Really, for sure.
So here's the most difficult case. See, I believe that the most important case in American history, I'm going off on a limb here, baby. In the justice system, it's not Lincoln. We know, unfortunately, who killed Lincoln. I say unfortunately, as this maniac killed the greatest American along with George Washington. That's where I'm coming from. And so, where on earth comes the notion of why do we not know that who assassinated President Kennedy at 12:30 in the afternoon at Dealey Plaza and got away with it?
Right.
And why has the CIA been so obsessed with lying about what we have been talking about? That's subjective.
But Robert, I mean, I'm sitting here just stringing dots together, and it would seem obvious to me that the reason they're lying about it is because they were involved in it. That's the reason you would lie.
Without question, that's a rational explanation.
Yeah. So, okay, one more thing here. I'll ask you to speculate again. Do you think Oswald was set up as a patsy here? Do you think that was planned ahead of time?
There's evidence to the fact. Let's put it that way. There's at least one woman who wrote a very good book, Judith Baker. People laugh at it. They say, well, she was alleged had a loving affair with Oswald. I said, but there were very serious people who read this book, who saw a lot of evidentiary issues pop up. And I don't think it's sufficient to say because there was a romance between the two of them. She was a child prodigy. She was a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And the government put her in charge of various ways to murder people, with a pill to the neck or whatever, all this kinds of stuff you hear about from James Bond, but that's a movie. This is like, supposedly real life here. So, given all of that, I do think that it's wrong to sit down on a case of this magnitude, and for people who have talked about neutron activation analysis, and it's a fake, and the experts say it's a fake, and the government accepts now it's a fake. I mean, where did we begin going back over everything? And then maybe that's part of the whole theory here is no one will have the time, the interest, the inclination to really do what you're doing, which is incredibly important. And that is to search for truth. That is, to me, every case I have ever tried. I said a trial is a search for the truth under the rules of evidence, and began with that. Let's examine the evidence in this case. So I was trained that way, and I live my life that way to do it right. So, God bless you for what you're doing. And for the people who you work with, it's not easy. And if anyone thinks it's easy, you just sit down and you read a book about something. Now I'm an expert. They got it all wrong. If you care enough about all this stuff, it's gut-wrenching.
I'm just a schmuck sitting in Minneapolis. God bless you for doing what you're doing. It's like, that's all I can say. It's like, I'm just trying to help out. That's all I'm trying to do. Just really quick, you've written, is it 34 novels?
Yes, 34 novels.
Is it?
No, 29 novels. 29. They're about cases I handled. They're very, very different. There's the Marlene Champy character, who is the woman in charge of the sex crimes unit. She falls in love with Karp, who's the DA, assistant DA. They get married, they have children, and so on. Their life goes forward. But there are 5 nonfiction books. And the one I truly recommend, obviously, is That Day in Dallas, because it's the signature book of all of them. But Echoes of My Soul, is the book to write about. If you want to know really who the legend Frank Hogan was and what I did in my 10 years in that office, read that book. I guarantee you. I will. Be moved by it. Believe me.
I will. Once again, I just want to reiterate, I found That Day in Dallas is a really, really quick read considering how long it is. And I'm glad you wrote the first part too, because it's like there was some justification internally about why you did what you did. And so it was It's very well put together. I mean, I told you this earlier. I'll be a cynic here. I usually skip over those parts of this book, but I started this one and it sucked me in. I read the whole thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
I want to thank you for joining us tonight, Robert. Really, really appreciate it very much.
You honor me by having me, believe me.
Thank you. Thank you. You take care, all right? We'll see you. God bless you. Hi, all. Jim Peters again for Conk News. Let me tell you one of the greatest things about Conk News. It's free. It's completely and totally free. You don't need to register. You don't need to log in, subscribe, none of that stuff. Sure, they run a few ads on the front page, but if you're an old fogey like me, you might actually appreciate this because when you check out Conk News at conk.com, you'll probably notice that it's the closest thing to an old-fashioned hard copy newspaper that you'll find online. The latest up-to-the-minute news from 75 high-quality sources collected every 3 hours, all laid out with photos and headlines directly from the articles. And when you click on a story, you go directly to that story. No ad page, no interstitial page, none of that stuff. This is the way online news is meant to be. And did I mention that it's completely free? Seriously, how much of stuff in America is free now, right? That's of quality anyway. So check this out for yourself. It's at conk.com, CONK.com. Conk News. Our thanks. Yeah, I did press the right button. Our thanks to Robert Tanenbaum for joining us. That was fascinating. You know, if you're like me, I mean, I've been reading about this assassination and what happened in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963 for 30 years. And it's interesting to hear. He wasn't actually there, but he was as close to there as anybody probably alive currently is. So, and it was his job to collect the evidence, and he collected it. So it's his book is coming out on June 10th. It's called That Day in Dallas. We'll have a link on our show blog for that. Also for the other book you recommended too, Echoes of My Soul. We're going to put a link up to that too. But yeah, the guy's written 34 books total, I think it was, or 33, something like that. It's freaking unbelievable how he cranked those out. I alluded to this at the top of the show. I want to thank you folks for the well wishes you sent me regarding my Uncle Donnie. He passed away a couple of weeks ago now. We had his funeral was on Saturday, and it was in Bayfield, Wisconsin, which is a small town. But and if you know anything about Bayfield, it's a huge tourist destination. And there's like only 600 people that actually live there, but there's several thousand people that are living there in the summer. And so it's not season yet, and the town basically shut down to go to his funeral. It was pretty cool, and he had about 50. It was a military funeral. He was a Bronze Star Award winner from the Vietnam War, and he had it was pretty cool. You know, you go to most of the funerals, military services, they will have 3 people doing the 3-gun salute. He had a dozen. So, I don't know. At any rate, yeah. Not a time for me to get verklempt. This is part 2 of our show, and we talk about science news and UFO stuff and paranormal stuff and all that sort of stuff. And I don't have a lot tonight because I knew that we were going to go overtime with Mr. Tanenbaum. I knew that. So, but I do. This is worth pointing out, and that is on Monday. There was a week ago today, not today. And I can't remember what day that is. Well, it says that was March 5th, right? Microsoft shut down Skype. Now, if you're an old fogey like me and you realize that Skype was around since I think 2001, if I'm correct. They didn't own it right away, but they bought it eventually, and it was basically the Zoom of its time until the pandemic hit, and then people discovered you could do the same thing on video. Although you could do video on Skype, it was known as an audio application. That was his reputation. So it was audio. And so once Zoom reared its ugly head, Skype was screwed, and they shut it down for good. So it's amazing how things change. And now people aren't using Zoom that much. There's all sorts of different teams, all sorts of different applications that do this, that do what Zoom does. And but during the pandemic, it's like people suddenly discovered this. Their stock went crazy. They had hundreds of millions of people on, sometimes at the same time. I'm still amazed at scale. I understand the technology involved here, and I've run websites and run data centers myself, all that sort of stuff. But the thing is, I'm still amazed at scaling up some of this technology. Same with AI. It's like, do you know what's involved in an AI data center? It's nuts. It's crazy. Not to mention the fact they're gobbling up electricity like it's going out of style. It's freaking incredible. It is. But right now, I mean, I use Copilot all the time. The only reason I use Copilot is because it's free, because I got it with my Windows operating system. That's the only reason. That's the only reason. A lot of people use ChatGPT. The CEO was that Sam Altman of OpenAI that owns ChatGPT. They said that GTP5, which is coming out later this year, will be smarter than any human on the planet. That's what they've said. They've already said that. Great. And I've predicted, I've been talking about this for some time. People say, well, it's going to be the death of humanity. It's going to wipe humans off the face of the earth. No, none of that's going to happen. I'll tell you what's going to happen. It's going to put an enormous number of people out of work. That's what's going to happen. And it's going to happen relatively quickly. And we as a society might have a big problem, because you know what happens when people have a lot of time on their hands? Crime. That's what happens when people get bored. It's like all this hacking stuff that people talk about. Oh my God, there's so much hacking in the world. No, well, most of the hacking comes from Russia. And most of those guys in Russia aren't hacking for money. Some of them are, but most of them aren't. They're hacking because they're bored. I'm not kidding. They have enormous skill sets, and there's no way, there's no way in their country for them to get a decent job. And so they run around the world hacking servers and data centers and shit because they can. And they have nothing to do. That's what people do when they get bored. They commit crime. And so I do not see this in the short term going well. I don't. Now the really interesting thing is Pope Leo the 14th. He's already addressed this. He even said now he picked the name Leo because his predecessor, Leo the 13th, which was around the 1890s, if I'm right, he picked that name because, well, he was a champion of dealing with the industrialization on the planet at that time, which was the start of the Industrial Revolution. And Pope Leo the 14th, our current brand new American Pope, he says he picked the name because now he says the next challenge for humanity is going to be dealing with AI. And he's right. It is. God bless him. He figured that out. And he's not totally technologically ignorant. So we need more people like him. So far, I mean, I haven't, he's given like one press conference, and then he put out like one, I don't know a papal statement. I don't know what they're called. I know there's technical terms for that, so I mean, he's only been Pope for about a week. He hasn't done a lot, but he's done a few things. And so far, so good. I was not a big fan of Pope Francis, even though he did seem like a genuinely good-natured and caring man. He did. I will give him that. But when it came to his politics, I thought he was naive and actually downright stupid. I really did. He was Pope Francis, of course, grew up in Argentina. Excuse me. It's Pope Leo, our current Pope, that ended up in Peru. Francis was from Argentina, and he came to the conclusion that the primary cause of poverty in his country was capitalism, and he's completely wrong. That's all there's to it. I mean, God bless him. He drew a conclusion, and he was a truly caring man. And in that case, he was deserving to be Pope. But no, as a as a political analyst, he was an idiot. I'll just say that right now. Anyway, so yeah, Skype shut down, and AI's raging his ugly head, and the current pope's he's on it. Okay, so what else we got? Oh, now this is geez. Speaking of Chat GDP, okay, current study came out that said that chatting with chatbots, which are what these things are called now, these AI chatbots, are causing people to lose touch with reality. Not only that, now this is the amazing. This just came out this morning, and that is somebody did a survey. 80% of Gen Zers, which are people under the age of 30, said they would marry an AI chatbot. They would marry 80%. 80% said they'd marry the AI chatbot, which is not a person, but it's even besides that. You know why you like the AI chatbot? Because it validates everything you say. That's why. A real relationship is hard because no two people agree on everything. No two people do. And the longer you live with anybody, those little things you disagree with mount more and more. And trust me, I'm going to be having my 36th year anniversary coming up this summer. And yeah, and no, the missus and I don't agree on everything. We don't. And that's the thing. That's why marriage is hard. It is, but it's way worth the trouble. And especially you don't want to marry the chatbot because the chatbot is just going to validate every single thing you say. And I also want to point out this: you can't have sex with a chatbot. You can't, regardless of what you think. It will not work. So I'm coming full circle here. That is a wrong idea. Get that out of your head right frickin' now. Don't do that. Don't marry the chatbot. Oh man. And finally, Hal Puthoff, who's one of the great physicists of our time. The general public, really doesn't know his name, but he is. He's one of the great physicists of the modern era, and he's been working for the government in secret clandestine projects for years and years. He's under zillions of security oaths, and he can't talk about a lot what he did. But he told Joe Rogan on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, he said that the government has at least 10 crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft, and he knows this to be true. Now, the interesting thing here, I'm blowing my own horn, is because I have always, said on this broadcast, I've been saying this for years, that the only thing I really know is that the federal government has at least 6 and possibly 9 or more crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft in their possession. And he says it's 10. So goddamn, I was just right on. And believe me, this guy knows. If he says we have 10, we have 10. It's like, that's all there is to. He is one of those, this is one of those guys you don't read about him in the news much. I mean, if you follow the news like I do, if you're a news junkie, you maybe have heard his name. Maybe. He's not really in the news. He's worked on all sorts of projects, fantastic, ridiculous quantum theory stuff. I mean, he has been all over the place. And yeah, but he said this on Joe Rogan, and for a guy, especially who's, like I said, he's under umpteenth security oaths, he said point blank, we have at least 10 crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. That's what he said. Now, the really weird thing is he alluded to this too, and other people have talked about this. Some of them haven't crashed. Some of them are intact. And the implication is that the ETs are basically giving us donations. They are landing the things and leaving them so we can find them. Oh, okay. That's interesting. Now the other thing, and I can't remember if he said this or there's another thing that came out, a guy named Matthew Brown. He's another whistleblower. He's who's talking about this program called Immaculate Constellation. And okay, so especially just talking with Robert Tanenbaum just now, when are people going to figure this out? It's really simple. So the government sets up a program. As soon as people start to find out about it who are not supposed to find out about it, they change the name of it. It still exists. It's like the Advanced Aerospace Task Force, the ATIP thing that Lou Elizondo ran. It's supposedly they closed it in 2019 or something like that. No, they didn't. They just renamed it. I mean, how naive are you? And I'm naive. And this is the reason, I couldn't have done this show 20 years ago. I would have been too naive. I've been I've had too many jobs now. I've been around too long. It's like, yeah, they changed the name of it. Whoop-de-doo. You know? Geez, can you wrap your mind around that? Well, just get used to it because that's what they do. Anyway, he was saying that the ETs are basically leaving the spacecraft for us to find. So, okay. He also said, I can't remember with him. This was my point that the craft that was seen by the U.S. Navy pilots in 2014 off the coast of San Diego and the East Coast, he said they were ours, and I said that too. Yeah, that we built these things, but the reason we built them is because we reverse engineered crashed extraterrestrial technology. That's the reason we have them. But he said, yeah, he said they're ours. And he said something I've also been seeing for a long time. He said that we are now living in two different worlds. I've said this too, and Richard Dolan has said this, and I copped this from him. I admit it. He's a UFO researcher, probably arguably the most prominent and credible UFO researcher alive right now. I think he probably took Stan Friedman's place with that. But about the fact that there's a certain number of people in black programs in the federal government, or let's just say more specifically the federal military, in the U.S. military, that are basically living 200 years ahead of the rest of us. And I don't know how big this group is. I've estimated, and Dolan, I think, has said the same thing. It's either several hundred or several thousand people, but they're dealing with technology that is 100 to 200 years what we currently have. So Brown, I think it was Brown that said that the thing that flies these Tic Tacs around is a combination of a whole different bunch of different technologies. But the fact of the matter is they've gotten it to work. And so now you have, I won't even call them spacecraft. Let's call them aircraft, right? You have aircraft because they're flying around in the air that can stop, hover, change direction, fly incredibly fast with no visible means of propulsion, no heat signature, none of that crap. And we're flying, and you're flying to Orlando in a stupid fucking jet. I just want to point that out. That they have that, and you have your stupid fucking jet. Good for you. That's great. Well, your ticket was $200, so I suppose you shouldn't complain. I don't know, unless you're flying Spirit. No, did I say that? No, did I say that out loud? I don't know. I did. But yeah, that's what we got. We got a bunch of people, and not many people between contractors, special ops people in the black box military, all this black programs, all sorts of stuff. These people are living in a different world than you and I are, and the real crime of that is they probably almost certainly have a source of power, of energy that's probably clean and limitless, and they're not sharing it with the planet. That because the thing is, as I've said in the past, we actually know how to fly faster than the speed of light. We know how to do that already. The reason we're not is because the amount of energy involved is absolutely enormous. It would take more, like even for a little two-seater, 30 foot wide spacecraft, it would take more than all the electricity on the planet to fly faster than the speed of light right now. So they apparently have they've come up with something, whether it's fusion or who knows what it is, but whatever it is, they have it and we don't. And they live here. They're people. They're humans. I'm not talking about any ET things. We're talking about humans that work for your military and defense contractors. They have this and you don't. And you're flying to Orlando in a stupid fucking jet. Okay. All righty. And with that, we're going to end the show tonight. Now, we did not take calls this evening because I knew we were going to run overtime with Mr. Tanenbaum. Tomorrow night, we have Dennis Neal on the show. He's written a biography of Elon Musk called The Leadership Genius of Elon Musk. I don't know if we're going to take calls tomorrow night either. We are definitely on Wednesday. We're going to take calls on Wednesday night. Our guest on Wednesday is our old friend Tim Conaway. Love to have him on. Basically, two old guys shooting the shit, So we'll take, matter of fact, we'll have the phone lines open the entire time. If you want to call in and talk to Tim, that's great. We may or may not tomorrow night. I haven't decided yet. I got to figure that out. But anyway, that's the reason we didn't take any calls this evening. So anyway, we're off to a great start here for summer. It was 90 degrees here in Minneapolis yesterday for early May. That's pretty good. We're doing pretty good. So it was 86 today, and I'm happy about that. I don't like winter. I made no bones about that at all. So I stare into the camera and I say, I don't like winter. I don't. I don't. All right, folks. I want to thank Mr. Tanenbaum for joining us, Robert Tanenbaum. We'll have links to his book is not out yet. It's coming out on June 10th. It's coming out in about a month. But we'll have links up to that. You can pre-order on Amazon. Like I said, I did read it. It's an amazingly quick read considering the fact it's not short. I think I read it, the whole thing, in 4 hours, I think it was. And yeah, he makes, if you just heard what we just saw there, he makes some pretty good case about the fact that, I couldn't pin him down on this, about the fact that it's not, that Oswald may have been involved in this, may or may not, but that the real point is there's more than one shooter, and that's for certain. We know that now. Excuse me, based on technology and evidence. So, anyway, thanks to him. Thanks to you for watching. I really appreciate it. Here's my new sign off. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are, and good night to you, wherever you may be. We'll see you tomorrow night, everybody. Take care.